At 5:47, 10 minutes before the alarm, someone is already awake, and the day has technically started without them getting up. Not the real day, the version of it running in their head, the email that still needs sending, the 5 o'clock conversation nobody's looking forward to, the meeting that always runs long, the grocery list wedged in somewhere before dinner, traffic that hasn't happened yet but is already being felt in the shoulders. None of it is real yet. All of it is already being carried, the way a full cup gets carried, both hands careful steps, long before there's actually any water in it. By the time the alarm goes off, there's a specific kind of tired that has nothing to do with how much sleep happened. It's the tired of having lived the whole day once already, lying still in the dark, before a single foot touched the floor. Fear of the day ahead rarely shows up as one clear, nameable dread. It shows up as this: a mind that clocked in before the body did, running through everything that could go wrong before there's been any real chance to find out what actually will. It tends to look ordinary from the outside, hitting snooze twice, not because more sleep is really needed, but because the mattress is the last place the day hasn't reached yet. Reaching for the phone before even sitting up, scrolling messages and headlines as if bracing early will somehow soften what's coming. Checking the weather app a second time as though it might have quietly changed in the 30 seconds since the first look. Running through a hard conversation in the shower, word for word, 3 different ways it might go, none of which will match how it actually goes. None of this is laziness, whatever it gets called on the harder mornings. It's an attempt to get ahead of the day by living through it in advance, in the one version where nothing can actually go wrong, because nothing is actually happening yet. That's the part that rarely gets noticed. The version being rehearsed at 6:15 isn't free. Whatever energy gets spent pre-living the 9 a.m. meeting isn't available for the real one anymore. By the time the actual day starts, a chunk of its resources has already gone toward a day that wasn't real. Spent on a rehearsal nobody was going to grade. For someone else, the version running before sunrise has nothing to do with work at all. It's a phone call to make about test results that haven't come back yet, rehearsed in every possible version of bad news before there's been a single fact to react to. Or it's a parent standing at the kitchen counter, running through how a school pickup conversation might go, 5 different ways before the kettle's even finished boiling. For someone else again, it's opening a laptop before the household is awake, mentally drafting the client email that might end the contract. 3 different versions of a sentence that hasn't been sent and might not need to be. Different mornings, different scripts. Same basic shape underneath, living the hard part twice, once in the dark and once for real. Common advice doesn't always help here. Just get up and get moving. Don't let it control you. Think positive. All reasonable sounding and mostly unhelpful in the moment that matters. Because dread usually isn't sitting on top of nothing. Some of what's ahead might genuinely be hard. A difficult talk, an uncertain outcome, a task with real weight to it. Telling someone to simply feel differently about a day that might legitimately be difficult skips past the part that's actually true, and it rarely survives past breakfast anyway. What tends to help more isn't a bigger feeling to replace the dread with. It's a handful of smaller, more specific places to rest attention, instead roughly what's ahead here, one at a time. Picture someone standing at the bathroom mirror, toothbrush in hand, already 3 sentences into a conversation that hasn't happened yet, defending a decision nobody has actually questioned, out loud, under their breath, to a boss who's probably still asleep across town. The hand keeps brushing. The rest of them is somewhere else, completely, rehearsing a scene that may never even play out, the way it's being rehearsed. By the time the toothbrush gets rinsed, the imagined conversation has already gone badly twice and been salvaged once, and none of it has cost the actual boss a single minute of sleep. Underneath all of this sits a mechanism that explains why the bracing doesn't work, even on its own terms. The mind, first thing in the morning, isn't really trying to predict the day. It's trying to reach a feeling, something that could be called ready, before letting the body get up and meet any of it. That feeling doesn't tend to arrive through more thinking. It isn't sitting somewhere 10 more minutes of rehearsal away. Readiness, the kind that actually holds, gets built through contact with what's real, not through advanced simulation of what might be. This isn't a personal failing either. A mind that's quick to scan for danger isn't malfunctioning. It's doing an old job. That instinct doesn't distinguish easily between a real threat and an imagined meeting. It treats both as worth preparing for. It just was never built for calendars, so it ends up scanning a spreadsheet the same way it would scan an unfamiliar street after dark. It helps to notice what this actually resembles. Studying for a test where the syllabus keeps changing overnight. No matter how many hours go into memorizing the version rehearsed at dawn, the real day rarely follows that script closely enough for the studying to transfer directly. A different tone in someone's voice, a delayed train, a meeting that gets moved up an hour, and the whole rehearsal turns out to have been aimed at a day that was never going to happen exactly that way. Which means the search for readiness, run entirely inside the head before anything has started, doesn't really end. There's always one more outcome to consider, one more way the hard conversation could go sideways, one more thing that could be forgotten. The list doesn't run out because it was never a finite list to begin with. It's closer to trying to finish a book by rereading page 1, more carefully, one more time, and expecting to eventually reach the ending that way. A forecast isn't a fact, no matter how detailed it gets or how early in the morning it shows up. Fear of the day ahead treats 24 hours like a single event that has to be survived all at once before anything has even happened. But no day has ever actually been lived that way. It gets lived 1 hour, one task, one conversation at a time, whether it's braced for an advance or not. No single habit here will make an unlived day feel finished before it starts. What these 5 can do is hand a few of its hours back to the moment they actually belong to, instead of spending them twice. The first one doesn't involve getting out of bed at all. It happens in those first waking minutes, while the script is already running, noticing on purpose that it is a script, a prediction wearing the certainty of a memory. That's what was happening at the mirror a minute ago, mistaking a rehearsal for a recording of something that had already occurred. In practice, this can be as small as a single phrase, held privately for a few seconds before moving. This hasn't happened yet. Not said to argue the fear out of existence. It usually won't listen to reasoning that fast, but said as a kind of relabeling. A story about the 9 a.m. meeting isn't the same object as the 9 a.m. meeting. One exists only in the body right now, tightening the chest over something that hasn't occurred. The other exists 3 hours from now and hasn't been written yet by anyone, including the mind currently so sure how it goes. It doesn't need to be those exact words either. Some people find an image works better than a sentence, picturing the forecast as a weather report for a country they haven't actually arrived in yet. Somewhere around the third replay of the same imagined sentence, catching it and naming it story not seen, does something the 5th or 6th replay never quite manages. It interrupts the loop instead of feeding it. Said enough mornings in a row, it stops needing to be said so carefully at all. The noticing gets faster than the spiral, which is really all it's meant to do. Most people never actually question the forecast itself, though. They question whether they can handle it, whether they're strong enough, whether today will be as bad as it feels, all without pausing to notice that the thing being handled is a guess, built at 5:47 in the morning, by a mind with no more information about today than anyone else has yet. A second habit follows close behind the first, and it has to do with what happens right after opening the eyes. For a lot of people, the very next motion is reaching for a phone in the dark, the screen too bright for a second, then a scroll through messages, headlines, a group chat that never really sleeps. It feels like getting ahead. What it actually does most mornings is import other people's demands and other people's emergencies into a day that hasn't found its own footing yet. An unanswered email sent at 11 the night before becomes the first thing absorbed at 6, hours before there's anything to actually do about it. By the time both feet are on the floor, the morning has already started on someone else's terms. What actually gets checked for at 6 in the morning is rarely information. More often, it's permission, a few minutes of borrowed calm, cashed in before there's anything real yet to be calm about. One alternative is smaller than it sounds. Doing exactly one thing first that's entirely, completely controllable and finishing it before checking anything external. Making the bed, drinking a full glass of water, standing at a window for the length of one full breath, none of these fix a hard day. That isn't the job they're doing. Their job is quieter, giving the body one piece of solid evidence before it faces anything uncertain, that at least one thing today went exactly as planned because it was simple enough to actually finish. The first few mornings this can feel almost too small to matter. Making a bed while the mind is still half convinced the day is already going badly can feel a little like arranging furniture during a fire. It isn't. The fire, most mornings, hasn't started. The bed gets made in a day that so far contains exactly one confirmed thing, a bed that's been made. It's a small thing to build a morning around. Small things are usually what mornings can actually hold. It won't feel like a solution because it isn't one. It's closer to a foothold, small, solid, enough to stand on for the next step. The third piece happens in the body more than the mind, which is often where the fear has already set up shop. By the time anyone notices it's there. Shoulders climbing toward the ears. A jaw held tight enough to ache by mid-morning. A low, steady clench somewhere behind the stomach that doesn't trace back to one specific cause, just a general sense of waiting for impact. This doesn't need its own separate ritual to be useful. The 2 minutes already spent waiting for coffee to brew or waiting for the shower to warm up work just as well, noticing the shoulders in that pocket of time and letting them drop even slightly, noticing the jaw and unclenching it once, one slower exhale, longer than the breath before it, not to force calm into a day that might not deserve it yet, but to ask the body a plain question. Is this bracing responding to something happening right now in this kitchen, or to something still 3 hours away? Most mornings the honest answer is the second one. The body doesn't know the difference between an actual threat and a well-rehearsed one. It braces for both the same way. It doesn't need to be a long pause, and it doesn't need to work perfectly the first time. A few seconds, repeated most mornings, tends to matter more than one long, perfect attempt tried once and abandoned. Effort in Buddhist terms isn't measured by how much force gets thrown at a problem. It's measured by whether that force is actually aimed at something real. A soft, well-placed breath in the kitchen does more than an hour of general dread ever could, not because it's stronger, but because it's pointed at the room that's actually there. The bracing was never pointless, and the body didn't get it wrong by tensing up in the first place. It's closer to a case of bad targeting. The body isn't wrong to prepare for something. It's just preparing for the wrong shape of day, bracing for every room to be entered at once, all 24 hours arriving in a single moment when a day was never actually built that way. Only one door opens at a time. No one has ever had to stand in more than one room of a day simultaneously, no matter how early the whole hallway gets imagined, floor plan and all, before breakfast. That reframes what these habits are actually for. They were never meant to make the fear disappear before the first door even opens. They're meant to keep the body from spending everything it has on a hallway that isn't real yet. So there's something left over for the room that is. A fourth habit builds directly on the second, and it's less about doing something new than about postponing something familiar. It's tempting to treat the first stretch of the morning as time to get ahead on messages, on news, on whatever's waiting in an inbox, a kind of early strike against the day's demands. Mostly what it does is start the clock on other people's urgency, before there's been any chance to establish footing of one's own first. Look honestly at what that 11 p.m. message usually turns out to be by morning. A co-worker asking about a file that could have waited. A group chat argument that already resolved itself overnight, without any input needed. A news alert that changes nothing about how the day actually needs to go. Almost none of it was as urgent as it felt arriving at 6 in the morning, on an empty stomach before there was any footing to receive it from. The genuinely urgent things, and they do happen, tend to announce themselves more than once, through more than one channel. A single unread message at dawn is rarely one of them. For anyone whose work genuinely requires checking first thing, a nurse coming off a night shift as someone on call, the same idea still applies in miniature. Whatever isn't the actual emergency can wait the extra 90 seconds it takes. To feel the floor underfoot first. A short, protected window helps more than it sounds like it should. 15 minutes, 20 if it's possible. Not a permanent boycott of the phone. Not a rule strict enough to become its own source of anxiety the day it gets broken by accident. Just a small, deliberate gap between waking up and letting the rest of the world's timeline become the day's timeline. The first morning or two, the urge to check anyway can feel almost physical, like an itch just under the skin. Usually that's just the habit breaking, not a real signal that something's actually being missed. What won't be there once the gap holds is a mind that started the day already reacting to a dozen other people's mornings before it had the chance to start its own. A fifth piece is less a separate habit than the thing that makes the other four actually work. It's choosing deliberately to name only the next real thing, not the whole day, not even the whole morning. Just whatever's actually first, getting up, making coffee, getting to the door. Nothing further than that gets named out loud or thought through in detail until each piece is finished. The 9 a.m. meeting doesn't need managing at 6. It needs managing at 9 when there's actual information to work with instead of a guess wearing a warning label. This is close to what present moment awareness actually means in practice. Not some permanent, glowing calm, just attention placed on the one thing that's actually here, instead of the 10 that aren't yet. It's worth remembering too, that today was never yesterday, no matter how similar the alarm sounds at 5:47. A hard day last week doesn't obligate this one to go the same way, and a string of easy mornings doesn't guarantee this one will either. Each day arrives with its own conditions, unrepeatable, done exactly once. Borrowing yesterday's dread and applying it to a morning that hasn't happened yet is asking an old key to open a lock it was never cut for. Yesterday can still be checked for what worked. It's a poor predictor of what's coming, no matter how convincing that borrowed dread feels at 5:47. This is where the two versions of a day pull apart most clearly. One version is a single object, 24 hours wide, that has to be assessed and survived all at once before a single step gets taken. The other is a hallway, one door at a time, where the only real job at any given moment is whatever's on the other side of the door directly ahead, not the 10 doors after it. Nobody has ever actually lived a day the first way. It only feels true at 5:47 in the morning, in the dark, before the body has moved and the hallway is still just a floor plan in someone's head. What would today look like If it only had to be handled one room at a time, that question doesn't get answered by thinking about it more. It gets answered by walking through the first door and finding out what's actually in the room, which is usually smaller and more workable than the floor plan predicted. The cup from this morning, the one being carried so carefully before there was any water in it, usually turns out to have been empty the whole walk to the kitchen. None of these 5 habits promise a morning with no fear in it. Some mornings the day ahead really does hold something hard, and no amount of naming forecasts or softening a clenched jaw changes what's actually on the schedule. What changes is smaller than that, and more useful. The forecast stops passing as a fact, the first hour stops getting spent twice. The body gets a few minutes of evidence that it can still choose something before it has to face what it can't. The fear doesn't necessarily leave the room. It just stops being asked to run the whole hallway before a single door has opened. What's actually on the calendar doesn't change either. The hard email still needs sending. The 5 o'clock conversation still has to happen, and it might still go badly, no matter how gently the morning was handled. That was never going to be these habits' job. Their job is smaller and more honest than fixing the day, making sure it gets met by someone who still has something left, instead of someone who already spent the morning fighting a version of it that was never going to happen anyway. Any single morning like this probably won't feel like much of a difference. It's more the kind of thing that shows up sideways, a few weeks in, noticing almost by accident that the drive to work started 20 minutes ago, and the dread that used to arrive by then hasn't shown up yet or showed up quieter than usual. Trying all 5 tomorrow morning is its own way of turning this into one more thing to brace for. A 6th item added to a list already too long at 5:47 in the morning, a more realistic place to start. Notice which of the 5 felt most familiar while hearing it, and try only that one, once tomorrow, not the whole hallway. One door, at 5:47, 10 minutes before the alarm, someone is awake again. The day hasn't gotten any easier. The hard email is still there, the 5 o'clock conversation hasn't moved. But this time, the toothbrush stays in its holder a little longer, because there's nothing urgent enough yet to rehearse. The eyes open on a room, not a floor plan. This hasn't happened yet, and there's no need to find out how it goes from here, lying still in the dark. There's only the first door whenever the feet are ready to reach the floor. Whatever's actually behind it will still need meeting hard or easy, exactly the way it would have anyway. It only has to be met once now, not twice. Some mornings it might take longer than a few minutes for that to hold. That's fine, the hallway isn't going anywhere. If one of these 5 was harder to hear than the others, that's usually the one worth naming, even just to yourself, even just in one word, left wherever you'd leave it. Meeting one room at a time is one skill. What to do when the room turns out to be the hard one anyway is a different question, and a fair one for next time.